Hey everybody, it's Professor Fay with your anatomy lesson of the day. It's gonna be a funny one today because we're talking about the humerus. I know, terrible joke, but I couldn't resist. Okay, so I have a much bigger humerus here. So there's a proximal end, which makes up part of your shoulder joint, and a distal end, which makes up part of your elbow joint. We'll start up on the proximal end. So first, there's this big rounded area here called the head of the humerus. This articulates with the glenoid fossa on the scapula to make up that shoulder joint. If we move out a bit, we can see a pretty big bump of bone here. That's called the greater tubercle. And then there's a little groove that's called the intertubercular sulcus or bicipital groove. And then there's this, which is the lesser tubercle, a smaller bump of bone here. So then if we move down from that intertubercular sulcus, you find yourself hitting a little bumpy ridge of bone here called the deltoid tuberosity. And that's where your shoulder muscle, your deltoid, will come in kind of to a V attached to your humerus on its diaphysis or shaft. On the distal end of the humerus, that's what the anterior side looks like. Here's the posterior side. I think the posterior side's pretty notable because it's got this big olecranon fossa in it. So we're gonna have the olecranon process of the ulna coming around and bumping into that as we straighten out our elbows or straighten out our upper extremity. On the anterior side, we can see the ulna would also articulate around this as we go into flexion. And so this is called the coronoid fossa because the coronoid process of the ulna would bump into that. Then we've got the capitulum, this big rounded thing here, and the head of the radius articulates with this, and it articulates right into the radial fossa, this little groove here. We've also got the medial epicondyle, which is a very bumpy prominence that you can probably feel on yourself, medial epicondyle, and a much smaller lateral epicondyle. So those are the different bony landmarks to know on the humerus. Now you might have to tell if this is a right bone or a left bone. And the way to do that is to find that olecranon process and put it facing posteriorly. And then you can also remember the medial epicondyle, then it's going to point medially. But also the head of the humerus is going to point medially because that's going to articulate with the scapula to make the shoulder joint. So if I arrange this on myself, it's something like that. And so the bone that I'm holding is a left humerus. And I hope you find that interesting, educational, and also perhaps a little bit funny.